Hi there, I'm Prelini Udayan-Chiechi. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for EMEA at Zendesk, and I'm joined by Roy, who's the CEO and co-founder of Tweak.io. Roy and I are delighted to be here. We're going to do our introductions in a minute, but we're going to be talking to you a little bit about the inbound and outbound side of marketing. And we hope by the end of the session, you're going to get a good feel for some insights and key learnings of what we've taken away during COVID and things that we've learned from our teams that we can pass on and share with you. We'll share the experiences from Zendesk and Tweak.io. We're also going to talk a little bit and share some of our marketing leadership. That's both from a small and large organization perspective to help other B2B marketers out there. So to kick off with, maybe Roy, I'll get you to introduce yourself first and then I'll go after.
Of course. So pleasure to meet you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Myself, I started Tweak about 3.5 years ago. We started in January 2017. The background is over 23 years in the industry of marketing technology. So just a little bit about Tweak, then we'll shift off to Prelini and start the session. Tweak is a personalization automation tool. We've also had the privilege of working with Content Square, who had a session just ahead of us. So we've been working with them for quite some time in the past, and technically we're in the same region. So Tweak is a tool designed to identify business objectives on customer funnels and personalize the messaging on that funnel, reorganize elements automatically to increase conversions. Myself and our team have been dealing with quite a lot of struggles and obstacles during the Corona time, so we'd love to share them with you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roy. Yeah. And as I mentioned, I'm Prelini. I head up marketing for EMEA at Zendesk. Zendesk is a CRM company with support, sales, and customer engagement products. We've designed to really improve the customer relationship overall. Our roots are in Europe. We're actually founded in Copenhagen, and now we're located in 9 cities across Europe, including 4 development hubs. Right now, Europe is a huge growth region for us overall. It's where we started. We have a number of disruptive brands, such as Deliveroo, Decathlon, Birchbox, and many others. We have 950 employees just within Europe itself. And year-on-year growth, if we look at our revenues, it was in Q2, 23.9% here in EMEA. So in France, we have over 5,500 customers in France, and we have over 70 employees across our offices here. Overall, we have 56,000 customers in the region. Now, for us, what Roy and I want to do is we're going to talk a little bit to each other. We'll probably spend the next 30, 35 minutes having a discussion and answering some of the questions we think you might have, but please feel free to use the chat functionality. So add your questions to the chat and we'll pick up the questions as we go, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So I guess the first question is, we'll talk a little bit about our strategy and pivoting our strategy. Just to start off with, Roy, for you specifically, how did you and your team need to adapt your business strategy during this particular time?
Right, so technically for us, because we started online, not much has changed as part of the experience, expos and so forth, but many has changed in a manner that now more companies joined the online arena, and many retailers stopped selling offline, they're closed shop, and they started joining marketplaces such as Shopify or weak stores and so forth. So this created a new kind of market that hasn't adopted the online market before, and there are brand new to it, so they're not familiar with the ongoing tools. Obviously, we went off from online conferences to more webinars. We've had, again, the privilege of Google hosting a webinar for us, which was a success just at the beginning of the Corona, and it led us to think of additional ideas other than the common email marketing and so forth. One thing that many companies did, and we followed up with, was to shift our enterprise product from a paid product to free. And this really assisted in allowing new retailers to adopt the technology they weren't familiar with. Many other companies have done the same. The difference in our case was that it was very easy for them to adopt because it's a plug-and-play solution. So by enabling them to adopt the solution without going through a payment process, it made things much easier. In the sense of our customers, I can say that Tweak is being adopted by many enterprises who personalize their messaging using Tweak. So we've noticed that some of our customers change their messaging, global messaging, according to where quarantines take place and to the different restrictions in different areas. So in our case, it was really shifting from a model where where we try to go into conferences, bring in bad leads from there, to working only online, which also fine-tune the KPIs. But additionally, offering a free product just before our release to marketplaces, which is what we're doing now, really helped us assess the conversion rates from different areas, from different regions, at a lower cost of acquisition. So that was that in that sense. I can say that content marketing has also been a strategy we pushed forward during this time. We're very used to doing organic marketing, and this has been a core strategy. For example, some of the tools we offer were 100% free to begin with, just in order to advance our organic rankings. But we pushed that during the Corona time because more businesses went online, so there was more changing content and guest blogging between other companies, and this also enabled us to increase the organic position. So when offline shifted online, we really managed to push our online appearances quite significantly, and this had really aided with the strategy altogether. I suppose during the session we'll touch base additional points and stuff we've done in that sense, but that was just about it. Yes.
Fantastic. And I think you mentioned when we were talking earlier, you also you were giving away some free product as well from your business perspective during this time.
Yes, so we had free products to begin with, everything related again to personalization. So we offered a free enterprise chatbot generator so that people would be able to create to trigger chatbots on their websites, or a free pop-up generator for lead nurturing. We actually adopted the Google Forms and enabled users to kind of plug and play, create an onboarding lead gen form using Google Forms and just push the leads into the spreadsheets. But these were already online, so we became prominent in terms such as pop-up generators, which were relevant to our industry. But the core product was never free. And when we decided to put it out there for free and realized that the traction is actually growing, we also pivoted a strategy in a sense and decided to add the products to marketplaces. So this enables us to reach a whole new audience, the SMBs. And they are growing online, especially now during the Corona time. We've seen that with Shopify when their stock doubled since the pandemic started, which actually tells us that many SMBs, retailers who had no online existence before this pandemic have now opened their storefront, and they wanted to adopt new tools. So it was a very smart move in our case for us to open to offer the product, the enterprise version, for free. As it really enabled these new customers who kind of afraid of trying new tools and have no experience to try something that is plug and play without a worry of it.
Fantastic. And I think from the Zendesk perspective, I'll approach it two ways. So from a business strategy perspective, there was two that we adapted. Like we provided, similar to you, we had a remote support bundle that was available to customers and also new customers coming on board, with everyone effectively going remote very quickly. A lot of organizations needed to provide customer support and customer service and customer relationships to their user base. And so the tools we provided allowed them to be able to do that, and that was that remote support bundle. What we also did as well was we introduced a Tech for Good program. So where we provided not just only technology, working with some of our partners, but also services that allowed the implementation for charities and other non-for-profit organizations. We had over 200 applications that we approved during this time. And those services were, as I mentioned, provided both by our partners and ourselves, as well as the solutions itself. From a marketing perspective, there was a lot that we had to shift. So similar to what you spoke about, we went from an offline world with a balance between online to completely going online very quickly. Yep. So for us during that time, it was really thinking about new ideas, moving away from traditional ways of content. So if we think about it, webinars only attracted content in a certain way, and we couldn't expect everyone just to be able to look at webinars itself. But we had to look at our content overall, like looking at like gated versus non-gated content, how we can actually be nimble and ready to experiment. So usually when you launch a new campaign, it might take 6 to 8, 10 weeks to get out the door. We were launching new content ideas, which I'll share in a little bit, within 2 weeks, from concept to execution, within 2 weeks of new ideas coming out. And so it was really that experimentation, really changing the long form content to much more shorter form content that customers were looking for. And a big part as well was really looking at making not content overload. So many instances, people were pushing products. And I know for myself, there was a lot of emails coming through and people were still pushing products at that time. But what was important was not to push product, but was really to have that empathetic and understanding of what was happening in the marketplace and where you could add value and help companies during that time. So that was the two shifts I think we really made on the area, on the business side and the marketing side, to be able to be making content much more accessible, being much more relevant, and being nimble and experimental with our approach as well.
Brilliant. And has this led you to seeing shifts in the ways that your customers engage or consume your content, doing all the shifts between gated and ungated content and so forth?
Completely. So as a result of the gated and non-gated content, what we found was customers today, there's different types. So for us, it wasn't about lead generation. It was really about helping customers during that time and providing content that would be relevant, useful to them. So we ended up creating a number of new platforms to be able to communicate that. We used to have physical roadshows that used to come to Israel and other places and come to France, where we would have 800 people in a room to go through, and we had to find new ways to be able to bring this to life. So we had Zendesk virtual roadshows instead of the roadshows itself. And the roadshows might have been a day, but all of a sudden we found we could run this over a 2-week period, over 3 or 4, 5 sessions, 2 hours a day, and people were willing to sign up for the 2 hours a day over a 2-week period, as opposed to doing a full whole day. We have things like the Zendesk Morning Show, and the Zendesk Morning Show was delivered twice a week over 9 weeks. A lot of hours worked for us, but it was very short, digestible content, 15 to 20 minutes, and it was almost like a news broad show. So we would come speak to customers that were going through some of the changes, share their learnings. We were going through that as well. So we would bring in some of our executives, some of our employees. They'd talk about the challenge that they had, because we're all learning and navigating this COVID situation together. And so the morning show itself was really relevant to bring the news over a cup of coffee twice a week to let people know what was there. And then that would also drive them to more longer forms of content if they wanted. We had, you touched about the SMB audience. We found the SMB audience was definitely, especially startups. They say some of the best ideas come during situations like this, the disruption comes. So we had the Tea Break webinar series, and that was, again, our teams bringing to life relevant content over a series where people could bring in a cup of coffee and talk and have those discussions. And then we had regional podcasts as well. So something we hadn't used enough of, podcasts really came back to life. So really changed the way that we were thinking about some of the content we were bringing to life. What about yourself?
Well, technically, in our shift, I mean, the team was actually ready for adoption. So being you could say a personalization company, we always test, we always experiment. So the shifts we've done during this period, and getting our teams on board and engaging with customers in different manners was very common to this team. But the way we started engaging with users, as you suggested, we've just released more blog posts, we've just done more online activities, and we weren't involved with Zoom webinars and so forth that much before. It was just a secondary channel for us, which is kind of funny, because now that we're doing it, we're actually realizing that it's a brilliant channel for us. It converts much better. So the content strategy really hasn't shifted, but increased, it spiked. And the team started adopting the new and more simplified KPIs. I mean, we measured the different channels in similar methods, but simplify the KPIs process. I suppose, again, as a personalization company, it was very easy for the team to adopt changes. We're always used to tracking and measuring different KPIs.
Fantastic. And should we talk a little bit more on the content? And I think Joe Sweeney has a question on here as well.
Yeah, I'll just shift to the main event, the stage.
Yeah. So Joe, actually, which is a nice segue to talk a little bit about, customers wanting to consume content, what they want to engage with. Joe asked specifically, what's the approach to gated versus non-gated content, and how have you decided when to use which? How do you measure a successful value of that non-gated content? Did you want to start off, Roy?
Of course, sure. So there are advantages to releasing free content and not gating it, because obviously if it's gated, it's not being picked up by the organic channels we previously discussed, and you wouldn't gain the added value for organic traction or revealing it to the engines. There's obviously also the advantage of gating the content to offer an incentive. So we approached a hybrid method, we ungated our content, but just fine-tuned the offer for each message. So when we're onboarding someone with one channel, then we'll say at the end of the channel, you'll see this and that content, but we're just revealing the links or the and the content is being released. If not on our website, then we're releasing it as guest content on other websites for inbound links, and then it aids with inbound lead gens. So we create traction from external websites with what used to be gated content and suggest it on the inbound lead gen forms. I'm not a great fan of gating content. Again, due to the fact that we try to push organic traction. But there is an added value to suggesting something at the end of the funnel. So we just kind of play with the same content between gated on our website, but still offered on external services which have nothing to do with ours, and still revealing the content for organic traction.
Fantastic.
Yep.
I think for us specifically, we took the new approach of ungated content. Yes, we often have gated many instances. If you think webinars tend to be gated, white paper downloads tend to be gated, any content overall, organizations want to capture leads. And so for us, during this period, we recognized it wasn't about capturing leads. Everyone was going through a trying time. So for us, what we really wanted to do was build a partnership and look longer term rather than that short term. It was, how could we actually help others? How can we share some of our learnings? Because we were learning along that way. How can we add value add? When the morning show, it's interesting, the morning show did go live. The very first episode, it was only 1 week promotion. There was over 2,000 people in that live session on the very first day. And what was really interesting, when that session went live, it was ungated. It was available on Vimeo at the time. We later opened it up in YouTube. We actually had someone go straight into the website and actually use a contact us form to say, you know, I'd like to learn more about your products. And we said, well, you know, what are you, where did you learn about Zendesk? And they said, I was watching the morning show today. And for us, the intention, as I said, was never to capture leads. Like, leads would come later in time, but it was really about having our customers, our communities, and our partners share the value and how we could help during this time. And it was really about, you know, when everyone's in trouble, it's how do you help each other through that situation? That's what the content was really about. But what was super key was making the content really relevant. So there's different organizations going through different challenges, whether they were small or they were large, whether different industry sectors, whether you're in the retail sector or you're in financial services. And how could you share those learnings that came through? And also the ones that have got it right. And remember, we had Carrefour in Belgium had shared their stories, like everything went online for them. And they had so much of interest in customer support that they were contacting us to say, hey, we need, you know, more seats, we need more people because we have more people coming to our customer support. We had other organizations from gaming sector. The gaming sector really took off during this time with everyone at home watching video games and playing video games. And so they opened up other channels to communicate. So if they only had email chats and live chat, they started to open up WhatsApp conversations. So what we really found, it was a way for people to be able to try and experiment other channels that they probably weren't used to at that point in time, but hear from companies that were doing that right. And so to that point of the gated or ungated, it's what are you trying to provide at that point in time? If you take a longer term strategy rather than the short term of capturing leads, those leads will come over a period of time. So what we found in the morning show itself, we actually had, it was like 48% higher viewing rates for the morning show series itself compared to, there was over 40 webinars that took place over a 3-month period. So that goes to show you can drive the people in the attendance if you're actually adding value and that content is made relevant to them as well.
Brilliant.
Hopefully that answers your question, Joe, as well. Did you want to talk a little bit about experimentation at all, Roy?
I think so, yeah. I think in a sense of experimentation for Twig and both our experiments with different approaches, as well as experimentation on websites. As I mentioned before, Twig shifted into a different model for SMBs, and we kind of pivoted the product to that direction. We were in stealth mode for about 3.5 years working with enterprises, and when we started working with SMBs or via plugins, we started experimenting with different business models for our own products. So the entire business intelligence product became a free solution. That was one experiment. At first, we tried to measure pages and everything, and we shifted the product to an ROI product. So when we started offering different sectors, Tweak is also fine-tuned to different sectors. It's social or arbitrage news websites, B2B websites. We're trying to generate inbound leads, as well as e-commerce websites. We started with the plugins on e-commerce websites, and the idea was, rather than offering a freemium model where you can target 2,000 visitors, target visitors unlimitedly for about 14 days. We then shifted to a model where you're just paying for increased revenue. We noticed that our customers find it much easier to adopt a model where they only pay when they see a positive ROI. But then again, it's very difficult to measure performance. When you go performance-based, you need to dive into the customer's revenues, making it much more difficult. So when we enter these platforms, GDPR, CCPA issues became much easier for us, because tracking revenue on the page itself could be a violation. You might track also things you don't want to. And on marketplaces, we were able to offer our customers to start trying Tweak for a couple of weeks, and then it measured the revenue increase automatically. So you deploy it, it increases the revenue, and then at the end of the screen, you see the cost. So whether it will cost you $50 or $100 a month. This enabled the customer at the end of the pilot to measure their ROI and decide whether they want to continue or not. And I think once we've started deploying this model, which was brand new for us, we tried different models for 3.5 years. We saw a spike in engagement from our customers. They were really keen to adopt the model. Experimentations in our sense was mainly experimenting with different KPIs, as I suggested before, and different sectors which Tweak is available for, and that really worked well for us. But I'm thinking if there has been any shifts in your case in focus between inbound and outbound activity, and during this period, did one become more prominent for you guys than the other?
Definitely, it's that whole sensitivity to what organizations were going through. So it was really looking and being more thoughtful for your outbound approaches. We really had to relook at our strategy overall on outreaches and some of the language we were using when we were contacting customers. It wasn't about scare tactics, it was really keeping true to our authentic Zendesk self in everything that we did. So the outreach was really about, we are really here to help you in our outbound, and we will focus much more on inbound efforts. So there's inbound efforts on digital channels really increased. Like with the Zendesk morning show, as an example, let me tell you about it. This was 100% true experimentation. As I mentioned, it was from concept to execution was within 2 weeks. And what we were planning at the time was, how can we bring short form content? So as we would watch the news on the morning, get a capture of what was taking place, we wanted to do the same for the customers, where we could drive them to the webinars, we could drive them to other content out there effectively. And so we decided over this 8-week period, there was 14 episodes. It ran every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 10 a.m. CST. And we also had languages. So generally when most people do webinars, they will do it in one language, but we were trying to make this appeal in English, French, and German. So the languages and the people that we interviewed as well, they were from across Europe. And so there were subtitles and everything that took place, and those subtitles were the live subtitles. So you actually had it in French, German, and English, and it was available to everyone. And that's something that we realized as well. During this time, you had to have that adaptability and be able to come out really quickly. We also looked at 2 to 3 minute segments. So as opposed to that content over a long period, it was just short, sharp 2 to 3 minutes put over the 15, 20 minute segments. So you'd have like 6 different stories, or 4 to 6 different stories you cover during that time. For us overall, it was really about like, how can we share what we were doing within our employees to shift to remote working, how the customers were shifting to that remote working, and what we could actually see take place overall. But the experimentation itself, as I mentioned, was very short. Everyone was completely exhausted because this was in addition to our day jobs. And when we did complete it and we saw the great results that were out there, to be honest, we ended up we were all having lack of sleep, we were suffering. So we ended up rounding up series 1, which we call the spring edition, just to take a couple of months break and to give everyone some breathing space, so we could come back with season 2 or series 2 to see where people were at this stage of how they've evolved in this next normal, because it's not really the new normal, it's this next normal that we're working with. So for us, overall, that experimentation worked really well. It's actually been nominated for a couple of awards now through some really big companies. And so I think right now what everyone should be thinking about as a marketer is what's happened with the pandemic. It's given us the opportunity to be able to fail and fail fast, or to experiment and actually be successful with those experimentation. And in the past, where we would have done 80% traditional marketing and 20% experimentation, we should really be thinking about 60% of doing some of the traditional stuff that's going to be tried and tested and deliver, and really looking at 40% in that experimentation, because that experimentation can yield really strong results. In particular, you need to think about how you're adjusting your inbound strategy. The outbound's always going to be there, and that's something that we have to do. But the outbound, especially in times of pandemic, has to be much more thoughtful and authentic during that time. And that authenticness could be in the sense of, let's say you're selling a particular product. It's not event space that you can actually sell, but how do you talk about what you can bring forward? So it's not the event space, but gathering people together in a virtual area. Yeah. If you have dinners in other areas, but you can be offering something virtually. So it's providing that value add. And here is some tips and tricks and lessons that we've learned to help you. But I think that's so key right now for different organizations, no matter where you are, to be really thinking about that relevancy in the content in your experimentation that you're doing as well.
Yeah, I could say that the multilingual approach has also worked very well for us. But I mean, you discussed the experimentations. Are there any additional findings you could highlight that you've discovered from your team experimenting, pivoting to these different experimentations?
Yeah, I think most interestingly is the channels that we had to try that customers wanted to come through. Like, as I mentioned, like just even with the Zendesk morning show, with the platform, we launched it on Vimeo, and then we found customers actually wanted to watch it on YouTube and other areas. And so through that experimentation, I think it's opening up much more of a community approach. We have communities like right now in this session where people engage and ask questions, but how much are we really engaging with each other? And so it's provided that opportunity to start engaging much more and asking a lot more questions and sharing much more of knowledge that we've never seen before. The other thing that we've seen is people are now more vested to be able to spend more time. Like when you're in the office and you're running around, you have no time to go to sessions, whereas people are willing to have those sessions more and spend more time and have that quality time because they're missing that face-to-face interaction. So really being thoughtful in some of the areas that you're thinking about. And you spoke a little bit about the KPIs, but really adjusting your KPIs to see what your KPIs that you're looking to do. And so for us, it was, how are we actually nurturing across the funnel rather than just looking at the bottom of the funnel? What are we doing in terms of when you're doing outbound, instead of converting immediately, how are they, again, going through that funnel? How is that referral? How are you using different things such as intent scoring to be able to understand what's happening in an account specifically rather than to individuals itself? What is it that you're specifically looking for? And so for us, we really had to look at that overall approach in our KPIs as opposed to, hey, this has just got to automatically lead to a lead in the pipeline, because there's other areas that will ultimately come through, and it's about quality rather than quantity as well.
Of course. Okay, very nice. I suppose in that sense, we're nearing the end of the session. So really, I'm thinking, what innovations do you think from this period are going to last are going to stay here, are here to stay, as we've seen plenty of changes during this time?
Yes, an excellent question. So for us, innovation, as I mentioned, I think what it really allows us to be able to think about new ways of working. So many organizations are still pretty much in lockdown and they haven't gone back to the office. And so thinking about how do we use technology in a more innovative way? How do we use different forms of the marketing mix to what we might have traditionally done? So traditionally, organizations might have done billboard, there might have been direct mailer in the traditional sense. It was email marketing that was touched on, digital marketing between paid social, paid search, organic that was coming through, how we use webinars, etc. But really we're seeing a rise of other areas. We see a rise of podcasts coming through much more than ever before. Radio advertising was always there, but in certain markets it seems to have picked up. We see the use of rather than direct mailers going to offices, but what's a way that you could be sending more thoughtful direct mailers to people's homes, and how are you capturing that information? So it becomes much more value add tactics, and really more than digital than anything else, it's giving the experimentation to different forms of digital content that you could be leveraging. For us, we run something called CX Moments, where we bring different leaders across, and those leaders are talking about some of those CX experiences. Our CEO launched something called Shared Screens, and he brings other CEOs and venture capitalists together, and they share the screen and talk about a little bit about what's happening in their world. And so this would have never happened a year ago, 2 years ago. The pandemic has just really allowed for that experimentation, innovation, and technology to be used in its new forms and brought forward, so we can think much more digitally in all our approach. We probably won't see full-size scale events of 1,000, 2,000 in the future. We'll probably see hybrid situations where you've got some that go live and you've got streaming that might take place across multiple offices, and you've got the engagement of, instead of having 1,200 people as an example in one office, you could be in 12 different locations. People don't have to fly into one location for that, 100 in each. They're broadcasted, and then the network and interactivity can take place between the 100 people in there with those elements. So I think it's really opened up the opportunity to be thinking outside the box to the ways that we've done things traditionally, and it means it doesn't involve travel and everything that we've had to do in the past as well.
Which is something I must admit I appreciate too, because traveling for a 1-hour meeting is not something you appreciate. I could say that. Yeah, so I could say that from our end, the industry is also shifting in other areas, and it happens simultaneously along with us adapting, or SMBs adapting the online arena. Privacy issues are happening at the same time. I mean, the shift from cookies to cookie-less browsers. And I think the good thing from our end is that we've adapted it in advance. Twig doesn't use cookies. It utilizes fingerprinting, so it's still accurate despite everything that is happening. But mainly we notice that people are shifting towards automations. Big data has become quite significant, and it's big. So data scientist has become a common profession for every enterprise, and smaller companies can't afford data scientists. So we've noticed that the world is shifting more towards automations, which is what we've been trying to adapt to as these SMBs entered the industry during the Corona time, along with the privacy issues. And I think for us, we're going to focus more on automations, and I think the industry is going to focus more on automations, because more and more companies are going to be involved with online processes without the necessary know-how in order to deploy complex operations, and therefore companies are looking for solutions that could be automatically deployed and bring in immediate value, without the expertise required or maintenance required that was available until now, I suppose, only to enterprises. And other SaaS companies I've noticed are also adapting this approach, because really the SMB industry is growing online. It shifts from the offline to the online, and it's going to be more difficult for them to adapt the existing solutions. So I think this shift is happening in terms of the way we see it. Automations, marketing technology is becoming less about the data and manual approaches to deploying the personalization or actions on websites, and more about allowing AIs to automatically identify, detect, and act upon them. And this is going to happen in plenty of other channels, I suppose.
I think, you're spot on. I truly believe like AI is definitely going to help us in so many ways, and personalization is the way to go. But I think data becomes more important than ever through this process as well, because that ties into the whole personalization and to offering a better experience and that automation that can go with it. But I guess one thing I probably want everyone to think about is, especially in this time, is how do you look at the data that you have as marketers to be very personalized in your approach specifically? So rather than having the generic messaging that you might have sent previously, this is your opportunity to be really doing specific target marketing that you might not have done before. We talk about ABM, and ABM's been there for a while, but how many companies have actually done it to that true extent? So I think those are some of the areas we definitely need to be thinking about. And this is where the very targeted approach in using the intent scoring, I don't know how many companies use the intent scoring today, but in many instances, rather than look at individuals that might be coming through as you create MQLs and leads, but looking at it holistically around an account or account-based model. So it's not about winning every lead and converting every lead, but it's how do you win that account overall? And winning that account is looking at some of these people that are influencers in that account overall. That can definitely help you to win the account overall, and also increase that average deal size, because you're actually working with the units overall. So I think that's something a company should look at. The other thing is just with the inbound and outbound, this is a great opportunity for organizations that are relied heavily on inbound, and as you're scaling your outbound motions, to really think about that relevant content, because the relevant content can help you with your outbound approach. But it's just being very culturally sensitive to what's taking place, and sensitive to the companies and what the companies may be going through at this time. This is where trials, demos, free products do definitely come in handy, but also value add. So when you research that, you're doing any value add that you can give to your customers to help them in their business. That's where they're going to see you as a partner and see you as a value partner to be able to do things. I think there's actually a question that came through about agile technologies from Julia. And Julia wanted to ask the question, to what extent are we using agile methodologies to manage the marketing team today and experimenting in ways of working internally? So for us, we have a team on the EMEA marketing side, just over 50 people. And what we do on the European marketing team is everyone's ideas are equal. Like, it's not a case of hierarchy, like I'm the VP and there's all the directors and everyone else's ideas don't count. Some of the best ideas come across the board. And so it's the ideas when the teams can present. We have different forums where people can come up with the ideas. I'm going to use the virtual roadshow as an example. That came up in one region, and we then allowed all the other regions to adapt it to what was right for them. So it wasn't a universal one-size-fits-all. But the one thing we've said to the team is, when we look at our pipeline and lead flow in many areas, is how do we bridge the gap? So what we would have done from traditional face-to-face activities or direct mailers, which were high-performing for us, how do we shift that to a digital world? And so allowing the team to be able to try just different experimentations, as I mentioned, radio advertising, we saw in France, radio advertising has completely increased. At first we were skeptical, is that really going to work? And that has increased. Content syndication is something that has never really worked in the past, and yet content syndication has got new revamped form of how we could be using that content syndication. I had someone on the team in Germany, because we've got double opt-in and GDPR limitations. They came through and said, hey, we can't do telemarketing, but this is what they can do in order to help us. And it's like, maybe we can get that double opt-in very early on. So we're definitely giving much more allowances to the team to come up with ideas and experiments. And I think, Julia, to that point where I said before it was maybe 20% experimentation, 80% core, it really now is with 40% experimentation. We're really encouraging that, because we know that some of those best born ideas are across the team. For my teams itself, we put a lot of people in different work groups. We've got teams across the organization working together, so not just the standard, because it's remote work. And I'm actually running a workshop for my team next week with a third-party company to come through, and it's talking about how do you bring out the best in yourself. So for us, in everything that we do, we actually help our employees be the best that they can be. If they can be the best in terms of the hours that they work, in terms of the flexibility that they need, then we know they will bring that best in everything that they're doing. So that's what we're allowing for that experimentation through the way that they work as well. What about yourself, Roy?
I suppose, Julia, in the sense of working as an organization, so everybody adopts Scrum and Agile methodologies in the sense of squads and so forth. But in terms of marketing teams, I think Tweak was, to begin with, it was designed to simplify the marketing process and enable Agile approach to it in a sense that it doesn't require a team coordinator or collaboration. You don't need the back-end developer to deploy events onto the funnel, or other people for other people to experiment with content, messaging, targeting for different audiences. So really the solution itself, and we use it ourselves on our funnels, is designed to enable each member to experiment with what they have in their arena, whether it's content or UX, without working as a team, without the need for collaboration or coordination. So we obviously adopt the same approach, and we enable our teams to experiment with anything. They just shift over the examples. The same happens with code. When we do a POC, then we work with external developers. The same happens in every other channel. We enable people to just do their own work end to end, like a full stack developer, going end to end. And then we view this experiment, and if it works well as an experiment, then we focus on improving it and turning it into a part of our strategy.
That's great. Do you have any final thoughts, Roy, that you want to leave our audience with for a final thought that they should think about taking away of, if they haven't implemented something in the next 6 months, what should they think about?
Right. So I think obviously measuring the data correctly, as you mentioned yourself, Prelini, data is very important. Big data is becoming a lot to process. So measuring it correctly and having all your different channels funnel into a single hub, that's very important, and that's what marketing automation is about. Problem is that most companies, as we suggested, don't have the ability to spend the right time or resources into that. So the industry is shifting towards these kind of automations. I would suggest Tweak is one solution, but there are probably going to be tons of them in the next year because of what's changing. I would advise really adapting as many automations as possible, the full automations, not ones called marketing automations, them too. However, marketing automations are really the activity of deploying and tagging and creating events. Full automations, one that can scale your organization without that hassle. I think that's where we're headed. The next decade is going to be, as you also agreed, about AI, machine learning, and many companies are going to offer tools that are out there to just self-deploy. Hopefully, this will be the next decade of online businesses.
Fantastic. And for me, what I would suggest for all of you to think about is really the way that we used to work previously has gone out the window. So don't think when the pandemic's over, we can just go back to being the marketers that we were, and we could have that same balance between traditional marketing in its offline form as well as the online form. What I think we really need to be thinking about is how do you keep the human element in everything that you do, because that's going to be more critical than ever. Automation is going to be key, but you can't lose that human element as we go along the way. And I think it's super critical as you think about the future. It's how do you take some of the best of what you saw previously and you apply that to the digital world. So, you know, I use the example of the events. It doesn't mean we don't do events anymore, but you use that events, instead of 1,200 people in one room, you've got to spread over 12 locations, 100 people overall. You've got both a virtual broadcast, plus you've got the physical element to it. Think about it in the sense of direct mailers. Maybe it's not direct mailers where you send out something that's just selling to people that's going to their offices, but what can you be thinking that's much more thoughtfully, that's tied into your customers, that you can actually take that and send it to their homes where they're getting value. So let's say if HelloFresh is a customer, it's a HelloFresh box that you might be sending out, and you're demonstrating what you're doing for that customer in that instance, and you're giving them the box versus a traditional thing that you might have done. But I think it's really bridging the online and offline world is going to be super, super critical during this time. And just experiment. Don't be afraid of failure. Like, failure is actually really good because you learn from it. You look at all the best startups in the world and companies that learn from that failure. So think about that and really encourage your teams to be able to experiment. And the last is, I'd say, just be flexible and understanding and being empathetic to your teams, especially in this remote world. Like, be flexible in the hours that they work. It's about output based. So really measure the output that you're seeing and what you've got coming through, and building that great community. And I think a great community with your customers is going to be pretty critical. So I think that we're literally on time now, Roy.
I think so too, yeah.
It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here. Thank you, Prelini, for your time, and thank you, everybody, for spending it with us. And thank you, Quentin. Shifting it over to you.
Thanks, you too. You've been amazing on stage and sharp on time, perfect. So perfect. And so thanks a lot for the feedback session. We're gonna have a 30-minute break right now, and we will be back at 1 p.m. For a talk about leveraging the French tech ecosystem and landing in the US with Sportec Ventures and the French tech. So enjoy the 30-minute breaks. Feel free to use the networking features. Visit the expo section of the event, network with our partners, and we will be back in 30 minutes. See you.